The most difficult part about covering the elections would be covering cybersecurity. I mean, as we've seen in the presentation so far, the issues of cybersecurity in election are very complex, and we, first need to communicate that to a voter, and we also need to discuss this issue of cybersecurity, and that we're not going to have all the solutions by November. And so how do you present these issues that are very complex, that may or may not, have really significant consequences by November without confusing or alarming voters, which in its own way can undermine voter trust in the election, prime voters for disinformation campaigns, and other things that could undermine democracy itself. And yet, cybersecurity in an election is something that we, very much have to cover as journalists. So the best tool that I can think of for folks like me to really address cybersecurity in the election is to have absolute transparency from our county board of elections and our state board of elections, as well as our legislators. And so far, that's not a tool that I have access to. When I covered Georgia in 2018, during the midterms there was absolutely no transparency at all. It's better here in North Carolina, but there could still be some significant improvement. I will, praise county boards and the state board of elections for their transparency and their helpfulness when discussing issues of, by mail voting, voter registration issues, your run-of-the-mill election administration topics. But on cybersecurity specifically, the state board has adopted an approach of security through obscurity, and that they're just not sharing a whole lot of detail about what they're doing to secure the election. That's reflected in part by a bill that was passed recently, where there's a specific provision in the bill that says the spending that they're doing on security improvements for the state board of elections will not be public. So what they actually do, we don't have a way of knowing it unless someone wants to leak it to us. This approach, cybersecurity experts will say, is not especially an effective strategy because it locks out your allies from knowing what's going on, but doesn't actually deter anyone who's trying to cause mischief. The Russian hackers aren't relying on public statements by the Board of Elections to get their information. So there are, important limitations to transparency, and I want to recognize that. I don't want the architecture of the state board server. I don't want anyone's password. But I do want to know what the National Guard is doing when it goes to county boards of elections. I'm getting different stories between what I heard out of the state board and what county directors are telling me. And they're just saying the National Guard is looking at the physical security of the elections office and hasn't talked to them about much online security. So I'm not getting the full story, and there's some confusion somewhere, which is, not a good strategy. The state board also tells me that they're going to migrate the county servers to the cloud, which is an improvement for the cybersecurity stance. But several county election directors I've talked to haven't heard about that, and they're pretty cautious about making any kind of change in their election system before election day. So there's just a couple examples of a lack of communication between the state board, county directors, and the press. And that's not a recipe for success, especially when we're already dealing with an issue that is highly sensitive and complex, and that voters are already keyed into with some of these really big national, international stories around, foreign actors trying to hack the election. What that actually looks like is not well understood by the public, and so it's our job to educate them. But in order to educate the public, we also need some more cooperation from public officials. I just want to praise election directors in the counties and the state of North Carolina. I think North Carolina has done a better job than a lot of other states in responding to COVID, especially, as well as making some significant changes since 2012, 2016 and their election administration. So there's still time to fix some other issues, transparency. I think there's still plenty of time to educate journalists about what could happen in November, contingency plans. There's plenty of time for journalists like me to do some more preemptive coverage of election administration. Oftentimes what we do is something reactive. We see that there's a long line and then cover it and say, oh God, there's a long line. But there's plenty of time for us to do things like looking at the number of polling places, the number of voting machines in a polling place if they use a certain technology, and sort of preempt that and say, if they don't make administrative improvements, then we may see long lines. So there's a lot of that kind of reporting that we can do ahead of time. to make sure that election day early voting goes really smoothly. On that same note, we can educate the public. The voters need to know that the post office is delivering things pretty slow right now. It's just going to be the reality. And if they're mailing in their ballot, like a record number of voters are doing, they should probably send it in by about October 25th to avoid that ballot being late and therefore not counted. We can set expectations for voters that we very probably won't know the full election results on election night. In fact, we won't know the results on election night. And it's going to take a little bit longer for counties to process the absentee by mail ballots that are coming in after election day and still legitimate, and then count those along with UOCAVA overseas and provisional ballots. To what we can't fix, and I'll make this pretty quick, we can't stop China, Iran, North Korea, Russia from trying to meddle with our elections. It's just not something that is going to be solved. We can't fix some of the fundamental problems underlying our election security approach. There are really national conversations around how we can improve our stance. It's a woefully underfunded, election administration security in general is woefully underfunded on a national level, and North Carolina is no exception. We won't be able to improve the poor quality of our election technology, which is a problem since 2002, well, decades longer, but since our Help America Voting Act was passed in 2002 that established our sort of current mechanism for managing this kind of thing. And it's very probably too late to implement any kind of new election audits. This is something that the state was discussing earlier in the year. These are things that need to be solved. And so come November, if the election, goes sideways or goes perfectly, no matter what happens, we're going to need to address some of these longer systematic problems as soon as we can, because they take a long time to fix. And if we don't, start covering them and working on them right now, we're going to have the same problem in 2022, 2024, so on and so forth. We'll be able to run the election, but there are still some serious issues we'll need to be prepared for.